I know every year in science class you have talked about how to perform an experiment and how to ask questions that can be tested through proper experimentation. So these notes are just going to quickly review that information and hopefully just jog your memory about what you've experienced before, even in our class this year. So just a reminder of what science is to begin with. It's an organized way of using evidence to learn about the natural world around us. So in order to understand more, scientists usually go through the same steps or the processes of studying and describing things that are happening all around them, because we can pretty much expect that nature is going to be predictable. That means that we can expect certain things to happen under the same conditions over and over. These steps aren't necessarily always in the same order, so I know that you've learned the scientific method as the series of steps that because we number them, we think that it all happens in the same order, but sometimes you might double back and go through several of the parts of the procedure over again. So the method is more of a guideline for us to solve problems scientifically. So if you look at the graphic on the right, it kind of gives you a flow chart, a better understanding of how it becomes a little more circular than a line. So scientific thinking usually begins with observations, and an observation is just the process of gathering information about what's happening around you, but in a more careful and orderly way, so it's not just completely random. Usually your observations are going to involve your senses, so just think of the things that you use, like your sight and your ability to hear. Sometimes you use taste, but I'll tell you now, most likely we're not going to use that sense in class. There are two different types of observations that you can make to get information or data. The first is called quantitative, and this is when you're measuring something or counting something and you're going to express the data in terms of a number. The other type is called qualitative data, so you're describing the quality of something, and so you're using adjectives and you're using characteristics that aren't usually something that you're counting, so it's more like a color, or you might describe the texture or the shape of something instead. So scientists use all of this data, both qualitative and quantitative, in order to make inferences, and that's just another way to say that they're trying to explain their observations. So these observations do lead them to have some questions oftentimes, and these questions are the types that can be tested by doing an experiment. So once you have the question, scientists usually is going to come up with a possible explanation for a solution to the question, and usually it's based on some things that they know about other situations that are kind of similar. So basically it's taking what you know already and predicting what you think is going to happen next, and that's known as a hypothesis. So experiments are carried out in order to test the prediction or hypothesis. And in order to have a valid experiment, so one that really makes sense to other people and is true or accurate, it's important for you to include a control group. So this means that you have one set of information where you didn't change anything at all, and you're comparing all your other information back to this. That's called a standard for comparison. So this variable is any factor that could change in an experiment. So just to review quickly the different types of variables that they might experience or they might observe in the experiment. The first one is independent. You've heard this before. Another word for that is manipulated. And just to review that, independent starts with the letter I, and to remember what it means is that it is what I change in the experiment. The dependent variable responds to what you do. So it depends on the independent. This is basically what changes as a result of the independent variable. And then the constant, the key word there you want to look for is same. So anything that stays the same, that you're having to do this on purpose for each trial, would be considered a constant. The reason we want to keep certain things constant is that if you change more than one variable in your experiment, it's going to be really hard later on when you're analyzing your information to try to figure out what caused the changes that you may have seen. So you just want to do one at a time. So once a scientist has gone through lots of experiments and they've made observations throughout, they're going to analyze the information that they get in order to make conclusions about what they predicted originally. So these results could lead them to have more questions because they don't really understand why things happened the way they did, or maybe things didn't work out the way they thought that it would, and so they want to know more about it. It could also lead to new knowledge and understanding about the world around us, which I think at this point, after doing a lot of experiments in class over the years, you should kind of understand why you're doing it. And so just make sure that if you have any questions about this, or if there's anything that you're kind of unsure about after going through this review and you'd like a little more explanation, make sure you take some of the blank space of these notes and write those questions down so that when we're back in class, you can ask me, you can ask somebody at your table, and we can have a conversation about it and make sure that you get it once we talk about it. Hope you have a great night, and I'll see you in class.